Welcome to another episode of UnHypnotized with me, your host, True Heather. Now, we've done a few episodes, and now we're going to dive into another conversation about Bitcoin and dating and all of the relevant connections between life and fiat and Bitcoin and the way that our relationships and the way we make connections with people really relates to everything in life. So we have another guest today who I'm really excited to introduce to you. So I'll bring you on, John. Welcome to the podcast.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure getting to know you a little bit and certainly excited to chat with you today.
Yeah, it was interesting because we were connecting online through the Bitcoin Medellin Conference, and I was getting really excited about it. Then I decided to go, and then being able to meet you, and then realizing that you were the organizer of that conference in Colombia was just like a really good vibe right from the beginning.
Yeah, for sure. No, definitely was. I mean, it's funny when you start something like and really have no, skin in the game and people don't know you. It's like you have to be really hyper aware of like any interaction on social media and stuff. And so, when I saw you were like tweeting like how it sounded interesting, I'm like, oh, we need to interact with you. So, and it turned out you're, a pretty cool person. And we're super glad you came down to Columbia and came to the conference. And I hope you felt like it was a good experience.
Oh, yeah. It was my first conference outside of Canada, like in terms of a Bitcoin conference. I've done a lot of conferences in my hypnosis career, but it was really nice to be able to see another conference in another country, but also just how many people from all around the world came. How many people from all around the world came was just fascinating to me, and just like people's like commitment to Bitcoin, and then, even your commitment and then your team, and just like I know what it really takes to put on a conference. And so I always have just so much respect and appreciation for the work that goes into something like that.
Yeah, for sure. No, thank you. That's awesome.
Yeah, and, this is kind of how we got here because we got to know each other a little bit at the conference. I got to see and meet your family that was also there. And, as this was growing season 2, thinking about, like, who's gonna be on the show and what kind of guests we're gonna have, and, as the theme was expanding about this dating and relationships in Bitcoin, it's really gonna be fun to dive into your perspective, being a Bitcoiner and being married. And so I guess my first question is, did you find Bitcoin before you got married?
No, nope. I was
What?
married for, um, I don't know, maybe 2 years at that point, about 2 years when I found Bitcoin. So, yeah, I was already married. My wife was, kind of like, "Oh, I'm not sure, like, let's not, like, throw every penny we have, into Bitcoin right away." So, and of course, I mean, most people aren't like that. It takes some time Bitcoin takes time to really understand. So, you don't just go crazy the minute you, like, hear about it or first buy a little bit, So, she was a little bit, cautious and kind of was just along for the ride with me for, a little while, maybe probably 4 or 5, 6 years. But she actually started her own company about a year ago, year and a half ago. And so now like she's allocating everything she can to her own stack. So, which is pretty awesome to see.
Ooh, that's fun. Yeah, that whole all in, because I think it's kind of both in that sense of like sometimes, yeah, people might go all in when they first heard about it, but just from that number go up, number go down, try to make money, not really from like a longevity or like a sustainable understanding of it. And I know even for myself, like I still am like, so do I take all of the money in my checking account and put it into Bitcoin and then pay things from there? Like I'm still there.
Yeah. No,
Um,
that's a really, really hard thing. Yeah.
yeah,
I mean, I know I'm there too. I mean, because of course, running events, right? We get money comes in and
yeah,
credit cards and less cash now than ever before, but it's still coming in that way. So I mean, like, ultimately, and then it's like, do you convert every last penny, or do you like just pay the things out that you have, and then leftover essentially kind of goes into Bitcoin, or gets spent on other, like, recreational or fun stuff, like taking this trip where I'm at now to see my sister and my son. So I mean, I don't know. It's a weird thing. Like, I think that's a hard thing. If most of your money's still coming in fiat form, like,
yeah,
do you convert it, or do you just, like, I don't know. Like, for us, I think we just kind of try to keep enough to spend, and then,
yeah. Because like I love the idea of just converting it to, because then we're really saying like, well, it's better money. It's better money. Why would we want to keep like a lesser money, But at the same time, obviously, we're living in a fiat world. So I can understand that. And just thinking about your story and some things that you told me before this, once you became, or I think you were saying like it took you a while to find like your person and get married.
yeah, I didn't get married till I was like just about 40, and I think my wife, it was in her 30s, so we're just about, she was 30, I guess. So yeah, I mean, we both like didn't get married super young, either of us. So um yeah, it was definitely one of those things where I think it was better waiting, but I think if I had been in a better financial position, like, to be fair, like, I think one of the things, like, I think a lot of men kind of don't even think about marriage now, because there's like no hope. Like, you don't, you want to be able to provide for your family. And like, when you're in that type of financial position where you don't feel like you have the resources to do it, it makes it really hard to want to have a family, and have other people that you have to support and take care of. I mean, now it's my wife and we have 3 kids. So, I mean, there's a lot of mouths to feed. And like, I think for men, realistically, I think one of the hard parts of dating is, like, men don't want to, be super committed to, starting a family and having other lives to take care of if they don't feel financially secure. And I think that's really hard. And, for me, like, personally, like, before Bitcoin, I coached college basketball, and I coached, like, I had some pretty good jobs. I mean, I was the head coach of a couple different colleges. But I never made more than like 32,000 a year as a head coach at any of those 4 colleges. And so I take that back. The last one I did. But not like way, way more. I made like 50, I think. So, I just think, like, for, to have a family in America, this was, in that last job was, I want to say, like, around 2014 to 2016 ish.
Mhm.
So, to have a family of 5, to, that's a lot on someone, especially if you're the only breadwinner in the house. So, like, for a man, I think it's really hard too to want to be willing to settle down early, because you just want to make sure you have the financial resources to support that.
Yeah, that's a really good point, and that actually has come up a couple times in this conversation so far because of the difficulty now that it is to even just have a one income household. And the way that we were kind of like over time, like the frogs in boiling water, just needing like with like with inflation and just like the money printing machine continuing to make the cost of living so high compared to like what we're making in general in salaries, making it really difficult for people to like you said, just even have families on one income, but then also from that sort of man's perspective, wanting to have some of his shit together before starting a family. And I wonder, like, do you think Bitcoin fixes this?
Oh, 1,000%. I mean, yeah, because I think, just like, over time, you may, of course, like, hopefully, if you have a family now, you're not making 50,000 a year in a single income home, because in 2024, I mean, I'm not even sure that's really doable
Yeah.
in most places in North America.
Yep.
Um, so I just think it's, yeah, I mean, I absolutely think so. I mean, I think, like, it's like, I mean, I think for most like Americans or most North Americans who are in dating, like in the dating scene and single, like if you're saving your money in Bitcoin and it's more of a store of value for you. You're doing really well for the most part. I mean, there's very few people. I have been kind of listening to obviously other podcasts. I love listening to Bitcoin podcasts. So,
Yeah.
I was just listening to Checkmate talk yesterday about price. And like one of the things, I mean, there's very few long-term holders that are in a loss at this point. So like most people who are saving in this like are doing well financially. Like at least they're doing better than they would if they just kept it in a checking account or really put it into almost anything else. So over time, those people, as they kind of mature and get a little bit older into like their early 30s, they're going to feel a lot further down the road than their peers. And they're going to be able to, I would think be more ready to start families at that point in time than more than I was in my 30s.
Yeah, well, that's kind of what's been coming up, and just we see this online too, where Bitcoiners are really pro family, and that quality of life, coming back to the quality of life, and in that sense of, well, Bitcoin just being something where it's deflationary. We're not losing the value of your time, whereas right now it's almost even subconsciously encouraging people to just spend, spend, spend because it's losing value by the second.
Yeah, for sure. And then like when you're spending all the time, like it's like spending all the time is like instant gratification. So like you're doing things like let's go to the club, let's spend and like, and not to like get too crazy into the dating thing, but I mean like that's like incentivizing like, hey, let's just, go hook up for the night. I mean and so it's like that same instant gratification, right? Like everything that goes into it just feeds into making that an easier decision. And then that's obviously, that's not really like, then you're not like developing personal attachments and so on and so forth to like where it's serious. Because listen, at the end of the day, when it gets serious and you like get married, then like you better be willing to spend a lot of time with that person. I mean, my wife and I each run our own businesses and we just work out of our house. And so I mean, like we literally spend every single day, every hour pretty much together. Like we go to the gym in the morning together, we do everything together. So I even was like, dude, you have to come like be special guest here and make an appearance. And she was like, no. So, but generally speaking, like pretty much we're like interacting all the time and each other all the time. And so you have to be prepared. You have to have a real emotional connection with that person and enjoy being around them. And if like everything's just instant gratification all the time, it's really hard to like ever get there.
Mhm. I love that you went there when we didn't talk about it before, and that's been a talking point on the episodes prior to this one because that's exactly it, right? The high time preference of just let's go on an app and like get a need, like get a fix or like get a quick get a quick connection. And I think that
Well, it's
underlying,
fun, right? Like
yeah,
that's fun. Like, oh, like a first
yeah,
date, it's exciting. You're nervous, it's
yeah,
exciting. Like, do you get everything's like, it's like diminishing. It's like having diminishing returns on like, feelings, right? Like over time, it's not as exciting to go on a date. Like, I mean, never stop dating. Like we go on dates all the time still, which is great, which is makes it fun, and but at the same time, like, and you have to keep doing those things, but like, it's not as exciting as like the first time, the
yeah,
first time. So like,
yeah,
you're constantly trying to like hit the peak dopamine of like, that's what, the quick rush all the time of, buy this, spend that, like hook up here, so I think like you're just trying to always like get that rush, and
yeah.
that
I
short.
mean, that's why I did. That's why I like in the end decided to let married people come on this season because I was like, okay, because even if you're married, you still are dating. Like you still have to keep dating the person that you marry to, ultimately. And I will just say, sometimes like with the apps, like it does really come from like a desire for like something more or like a deeper connection. And I think like more the advent of it and like how it's just become just like many things in our society. Like there's just no end to how we could get a quick fix or get the dopamine. Like this is just prevalent in everything, but also especially for Bitcoiners, I do want to just kind of recognize that like it is really hard to date offline too, because it's like if you're say working from home, like you're working from home with your wife, but imagine trying to meet someone if you're always at home
Yeah,
or,
I think to
you
be
know,
fair though, they're it's been a long time since I've
yeah.
dated, all right,
Yeah.
like a decade.
Well,
Um,
I know, and that's all that I wanted to say is just like because this conversation keeps coming up, and I think we can all really recognize how there's like a fiat aspect to dating
for
because
sure.
of dating apps. Like
Yes.
this is just a reality. And I think that again, coming in with it, like I noticed for myself, like if I was like, kind of looking for connection or looking for someone from like a feeling of discomfort, just like I might like distract myself with TV, or like if I was like, even though at heart I was really wanting like a real connection, but if I was like going forth kind of looking for that from like a high time preference feeling of just needing to or wanting to feel different or needing something, then it was never good. It never worked out to be something real, and of course, because if we come in from that energy, and I think like that's where we might be able to also see how Bitcoin can also help us be more grounded in who we are and have more patience and have more enjoyment in the process, maybe of getting to that with someone.
Yeah, for sure. No, no, I think that's absolutely true. I mean, you'd stop being in a rush. Like you're not so quick to make a decision. Like it's like you want to vet things out pretty good before, and I think part of like dating it like as you get older and like getting married a little later than, I mean, your average person, I guess. I don't know, maybe the average age is rising. It probably is. But I just think like that same type of thing happens that maybe, and it starts earlier if you become a Bitcoiner, right? It's just that more mature thought process of like what's the like end goal here of the dating, and like you think through it a little more. So
Mhm. Totally, totally. And did you find there were any changes to your marriage like once you became a Bitcoiner?
yeah, no, overall, I mean, to be fair, I think like overall, I like it's just helped me in general. Just try to be a better husband, a better dad. I think because like you just think more long term just in general. So it's hard to not think more long term. And then you like start thinking about like me, I just had a good I just had probably not a conversation that parents have to probably have with kids all the time, like about dental hygiene today, just about how it's important, and like you only get one set of teeth in your life. And like, you got to take care of these, especially, and in my mind, I'm thinking like, especially your guys are going to be Bitcoiners someday when I'm not around. And like, you don't want to look like bums with crappy teeth. Like you should you need to take care of these things. So, I mean, it's crazy the things that like you really think about more. And, maybe I would have been telling them that anyway, but like ultimately I think like you think more long term and you think about these things. You want your kids, to think like, hey, I'm gonna be a successful person. I'm gonna be a Bitcoiner someday. So, like these things are important.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, it definitely changes perspective. It's such a different perspective. And oh, I think you were saying too when we were talking that like, well, now your wife sounds like she's orange pilled,
Yes. Oh,
but maybe she wasn't always.
no, because for a long time, like,
Mhm.
she would work for my company, but ultimately, like, she was like doing work at the events that we ran, right? So,
Mm,
we compensated her very nicely, but for what she did. But, like ultimately, like she wasn't really thinking about the household finances. You know what
right.
I mean?
Yeah.
handling all that and, the primary breadwinner. But then eventually she started her own company and it does pretty well now. So, now she actually has like a decent amount of money that she's thinking about. And like for a while, she just kept it in checking. And finally, one day I was like, hey, like, what are we doing here? Like, checking is like literally losing money.
Yeah.
It's paying no interest. So, I'm like, I don't care what you do, but like, here are your options. Like, pick something. And we went to the bank, talked to the banker together. And I was kind of like, in my mind, like, this is, I don't want to be like vulgar, but I was like, this is some bullshit. This is
Yeah.
like, they're really telling her, like, oh, you're going to
Yeah.
make like, a tiny percentage of money.
Yeah.
Like this, I'm like, hey, look, you can do whatever you want, but this is what I think. And she was like, I think I know enough now that this is what I want to do. And so she basically took all her free money and put it in Bitcoin. So
Awesome.
I limited her a little bit. She was even mad about that. So
Yeah, I get that. I get that. It's like when we were in that like small group talk with Jeff Booth at your conference, and he was saying, a lot of people were asking him investment questions and like kind of investment questions outside of Bitcoin. And then he said, yeah, I guess if it makes more than 46%, you could look at it.
right.
I just kept saying that. And I thought, right, like it's just silly when you really start to compare it to other funds and like other things.
Yeah. No, I mean, listen, I think Jeff's perspective is kind of like, like anytime you want to talk about anything in like the fiat system, you're like just wasting your time because he's totally gone from that. And like,
Yeah,
I just like, like, so for him, it's like, that's an easy response to just say, like, well, what's
true.
the, because he knows like over time, right, everything will just continue to monetize into Bitcoin, right? And and to me, like I was trying to explain some of that to my sister last night. I still haven't got her over the hump yet, but so I was trying to explain that to her last night. Like, just think about it. Like things should really be getting cheaper, shouldn't they? Like, all these things should just be getting a lot cheaper, and instead they're getting more expensive. Try to help me understand how that makes sense. And
Yeah.
so I just think like that's like where Jeff is coming from on everything. So like there is no other investment, like this is how you just hold your money. And then if you have to like liquidate it somehow to use it, then that's what you do.
Yeah, yeah, that's a good point. That's basically how I got my son into Bitcoin. He's 14 now. I think this was probably 2020 because I had been teaching him just about saving and spending, and because I grew up not learning any of that, and it really made even getting into Bitcoin hard because I had such a block to money and finances and like financial organization. And so I didn't want that for him. But I was still coming from like a fiat mindset of like how to save, like how to kind of divide your money and make decisions. So at some point he had like a little savings, and then he would look at it and go like, this made like $1. This made $1 after a year.
Crazy. It just made me think while you were talking about that. Like, isn't it crazy though? Like when you're in school that they don't teach you any of that stuff.
No, it's crazy.
They
It's
don't
crazy.
teach anything. It's just there's nothing taught about money in school.
There's just nothing. And like, and I was born in the 70s, grew up in the 80s, 90s, in school, and like also a female. And like women, we weren't even, didn't even get to have that conversation in a lot of aspects.
Yes. Well, it's a bad conversation for them. I mean, no, we're going to steal your money and you'll have to gamble to try to
Yeah.
beat us, right? You have to gamble to try to beat us. So like,
Yeah.
it's not a
Well,
conversation that they want to
yeah.
teach you, but ultimately they should teach you like you're going to have to do something with your money or else you're just going to lose it over
Yeah. I mean,
time.
even that information would just be like, you can't actually just save your money.
Yeah. Yeah. They're in a tough spot. It's hard because they really
Yeah.
can't tell you what's going on. So they
Yeah.
can't teach you.
And I mean, a lot of these teachers, they don't know themselves too. Like even for my son, like I kind of forced him to put it into Bitcoin, and then he was happy when it went up. And then when it went down, because this was 2020, he was mad at me and he's like, I never should have let you do that. I want to take it out. So he was like many people that buy high, sell low. And I was like, nah, you can't. Like, I'm not letting you. And now it's like doubled or whatever. Right.
Yeah.
So it was also, I felt really good for him to like go through the ups and downs of
Pain.
it.
Yeah. He had to feel some pain.
Yes, yeah, and, coming kind of back to that, like, um, finances, women, and even kinda like you said, it wasn't as relevant to your wife until she started having some of her own money in a sense that she wanted to do something with, and that's where I'd love to kinda take this conversation a bit, like, do you think that because we know that there's, like, a huge difference between the amount of men in Bitcoin and the amount of women in Bitcoin,
Yeah, there is.
right? We know that there's, like, a huge difference in this, and I do think that women like, there's definitely women that are into like more of like the finances and stuff like that. And then there's also women that are like, a lot of the women I talk to, like, we love the spiritual and the consciousness and like the heralding a new humanity aspects of Bitcoin.
Yeah, for sure. No, I mean, it goes hand in hand, I think,
Yeah, it can. I guess I'm just wondering, like, how do you think more women will come to Bitcoin?
I just think it's like it will be natural progression. I think over time, look, we're so early. I just really think that like we're realistically like
Mm,
very early. Eventually it's just be people won't even think about it because they'll just be transacting, on like tiers above, the base chain Bitcoin. So, I think like interestingly enough, we're like in a time of transition here. We're like we're moving away from like individual ownership of Bitcoin and less people. I mean, we were maybe hitting peak individual ownership of Bitcoin, right? Like it's getting harder and harder for individual people to own base chain Bitcoin as like every time the price goes up another little, notch, it gets more difficult for those people to come into it. So like ultimately, like I think, men and women equally will just be using Bitcoin pretty
mm,
ubiquitously, like, just like they do on like just on their phone, just like you use money on your phone now, as if that's becoming more and more common, right? Like I still at 50, I'm like, okay, I have a credit card. I take the little plastic piece of thing out of my pocket. But like, we're getting to where your credit card just can be on your phone. So like
yeah,
I can't imagine it's going to be that much different once most people use Bitcoin. But like early people like us, like ultimately like and I don't know like if you have a number or not. Like to me, I don't really have a number because my hope is like Bitcoin can get to the point where we have some extremely stable lending
yeah,
products. And then
yeah,
if anything I ever like need like liquid capital for, I would take maybe a loan to, and maybe it's not even in dollars, maybe it's in like, lightning or whatever to, it's a loan in Bitcoin. I don't know how that would work, but exactly, I guess I haven't really thought it through, but like, I don't know that there's a price for me that I would ever want to part with Bitcoin, but there's obviously people that are always selling, right? No matter what the number is. And,
yeah,
so right. I just don't know that many people are gonna like. So when you ask like, how are we gonna get more women to Bitcoin? I don't know that like that'll ever like, in terms of like a significant number of women coming to base chain Bitcoin. I'm not sure that that's feasible. To be fair,
yeah, yeah. And I mean, it's maybe not necessary. Like I'm always thinking of like,
yeah,
how do
no,
we
for sure. Like you're like your vibe is so like I want to be helpful to other people and I care about other people and like I mean I
yeah,
feel like I've said this a bunch lately, but like Bitcoin is for anyone, but it's not for everyone. Like a lot of people aren't going to get to own base chain Bitcoin. I mean, someone
yeah,
said it. Can't remember who told me on a podcast the other day. Like they were talking about like, oh, like just think about unborn children yet. Like they're never going to own base chain Bitcoin. They're going to
mm.
look at those us who were smart enough or figured it out quick enough to get involved in that we were really fortunate.
Yeah, it's interesting because it's not something that I feel like, oh my God, we need more women. Like I don't feel that big um push in terms of like my purpose in the space. I will say that as I've been kind of looking at it and then being at different conferences, I realized two things. I realized that one, there's a lot of people that speak at Bitcoin conferences that aren't trained speakers. And they are just speaking because they have something to say. But honestly, they're not really great speakers. Like, I guess coming from me, because I'm like, I was trained as a young speaker from very early on. I did a lot of speaking at conferences. I did a lot of videos. I did a lot of emceeing. I just did a lot of speaker training. And then being a hypnotist, I also help people get better at speaking.
Yes.
And I mean, Jeff Booth is a perfect example of this because, like, in person, he's so dynamic and he has so much emotion when he talks. And then he just goes on stage, and he's got so much good shit to say. And we love to hear it, but he's not a dynamic speaker. Let's be real. And
Well, yeah, no, but like for me, I would just say this. I mean, I don't want to like, first of all, like Jeff is like the
oh,
man. He's
I that's coming on the podcast. Like, I'm not
awesome.
dissing him.
That's
I'm just
no,
using
no,
that
for
as
sure. Like, yeah, no, listen, I think he's a very calm and yes, I like listen, he could have used some coaching on stage presence. Like I think like
Yeah, I'm not
only
calling
he
him out for that reason. I'm just saying, like, that's just the first part of my
yeah, no, like no, I understand what you're trying to say because
yeah.
like Oliver Velez has like an unbelievable stage presence, right? Like I don't know if you watched Oliver's, but he to me he was a really dynamic speaker. I was
Yeah.
like, wow, that was like the MVP talk of
Yeah, and
I thought
honestly, I
Oliver
don't need
Velez.
everyone to be a dynamic speaker. It's just like that's like one of two observations I made. So one is like,
Yeah,
not everyone
for sure, I
is
agree with
a
that.
speaker is a speaker, right? And then the second thing is, like, sometimes it feels like the women are put in like DEI roles, like, in these conferences. And this is something I've been just considering and thinking a lot, even in the space. Like, oh, we've got the women in Bitcoin talk, or like, and I think that there's two sides. I think, like, being a woman in Bitcoin, it's great to have like that female community, like when we're on the side, because like we do sort of need to support each other being in this space, and
Yes.
that's awesome. But I do think that maybe as it moves, my hope is that as it moves forward, that women are, and I know I've talked to other people about this too, and I know women that have said, no, I'm here because of like the value I bring to this topic, not because I'm a woman. But I think sometimes, like, women have been kind of like, oh, here's our woman speaker, or here's our woman's panel. And I think, like, ideally, I think that as we move forward and more women will feel drawn to the space, if they're like really just valued for what they bring to the space, not just because of this like DEI kind of, we have a woman here. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, no, for sure. But at the same time, though, like I do think like having some equality and voices. I mean, and I'm definitely not trying to tap myself on the back, but I think we had a lot of women and speak at our conference,
Mhm.
so a pretty good amount. And I mean, like, listen, I mean, the women that are like the women in Bitcoin that have come to base chain Bitcoin, like you guys are like alpha women. I mean, like you're G's, as I like my wife and I joke all the time, like you're a G, like you guys are G's. Like, I mean, to come to Bitcoin early and like get like that's amazing. So like you guys should have to me, I'm like, I think the women in Bitcoin thing is awesome. Like, I'm like, this is great that these women are like getting together and like, I don't know. I just think it's a good thing, but
That's
I
what,
don't look at it like DEI DEI at all.
yeah.
So,
I mean, I consider
trust
myself a
me, I'm
G
not a
for sure, so
DEI.
I love that.
What's that?
I said I consider myself a G for sure, so I love that.
Yes.
Just in life in general, but also no, I this is great because I've really been just tossing this around in my brain, and like talking to a few women, and I don't have any like really certain um belief on it, but I've just been noticing, these nuances, and how I think it is noteworthy to just think about kind of those dynamics and how
Well,
we
part of it is,
move forward.
do you think this part of it, I think, is this? A lot of times, once especially women get married and they have a family, a lot of times it's the husband who kind of handles the finances. Do you think that's true? I mean, maybe that's just my perception.
Um, I would say, like, probably more true of women that marry Bitcoiners. Like,
Okay.
because there's a lot of incompetent men out there, like in finances too.
Oh, sure.
But like, so it's hard to say because I think
Well, if
I,
you're married to someone and they're not like,
yeah,
if you're a woman and you're married to some dude and he's not
yeah.
involved in Bitcoin in any way, to me, like it's going to be really hard for you to come to Bitcoin. Like, what's going to bring, especially if your husband's the one handling the household finances, like what's going to bring you
Right.
to it? Like, what's going to motivate you to get there? You know,
Oh, and that's actually a really good
I
point.
think it's actually much easier for a single woman to become a
Yeah, because that's actually another thing I noticed, and like even sort of talking to some of the single men in this conversation about like where do you find a single Bitcoiner woman? And like that like conferences isn't really it in that sense because like generally speaking, you're right. A lot of the women that are in Bitcoin are found it through their partner or their husband or their boyfriend, or they're supporting their husband or their boyfriend, which is all good. Like that's I'm fine with that. I love being like I'm totally wifey material in that sense. It's just like it's true. It's not a lot of just well, first of all, there's like 3% to 97% or something. So there's just like we have a small pool of women anyway.
yes.
But I think that that's just a good thing to be aware of. Like, it's not really a judgment. It's just like, yeah, there's maybe, not a lot of single women in Bitcoin. And there's probably not a lot of women coming to Bitcoin. Like you said, if their husbands are taking care of the finances, um,
In Bitcoin, then
yeah,
why would the women have it, woman have any
yeah,
knowledge or think about it? I mean,
yeah.
my wife has to like sit through like shitloads of podcasts in the car and I mean like it's just like and then
Yep.
hear me talk about it. So it's like inevitable. Like if your husband is a Bitcoiner though, like it's kind of
Yeah.
inevitable that eventually you're going to become a Bitcoiner too because you're constantly hearing about these things and eventually even if you're not interested, it's like, hey, this is pretty and compelling.
Oh, some of my good friends in Bitcoin, like the girls, like that's how they learn. Just like their significant other, like constantly listening to podcasts. So then they're like, okay, this actually is kind of interesting. No, I love this because this is something I've really just been thinking about. Because even if I'm honest, like now that you're saying this, I don't know if Bitcoin would have been as relevant to me if I didn't have to deal with all the business finances and basically have the dark night of the soul that I had from like kind of believing in the whole idea that I can just do it all and have it all in that sense of sort of like feminism, and then being a single mom after like I was married, and then being a single mom and having my own business and going through what I call like my Fiat dark night of the soul, where like I worked harder, I kind of sacrificed more time with my son, I was more successful in my field, and I think I made the same amount by all the more taxes I had to pay and all the more expenses I have to pay, never mind like the loss of time that I had with my son in that.
Right.
And so I can't really say that I would have found Bitcoin either if I hadn't have had to go through the reality of our fiat system and how it's not really conducive to saving our like time.
Yeah. No, that's a great
Like
point. I mean, that's a huge thing, right? And I think most people, it takes coming to like Bitcoin to kind of realize, wow, like, or have to go through stuff to realize, like, wow, like, this is what I can get back out of this is time, really.
it is. I mean, when I think back, if I knew about, I guess I did know on some level, but I didn't really understand Bitcoin. I didn't know, no.
Right.
I knew, but I didn't know. When I think back, I'm like, imagine even the quality and the time I could have been stacking as a single mom, like with my own business. that was ambitious. Like I was very ambitious and motivated, and like it's not that I'm not now, but in such a different way that I just also have no desire to just kill myself, lose time, lose my valuable time for something that just actually isn't isn't making me better or healthier or more fulfilled.
Yeah, for sure. No, now you have some freedom to feel more fulfilled. So of course that's, I think like that's that long-term,
Mm.
you know, time preference type of thing. So, I think that's, and I think that ultimately, like going back to dating, like that like when once you start having a longer time preference on all these things, it's like then it becomes
Mhm.
you become more patient, more understanding of like what I need, everything it's going to be long term here, like, and you're not thinking for the short term. So,
Yeah, and this came up yesterday too with Seb, where we were talking about just a trust and surrender too. Because I do think in Bitcoin and in even relationships, like there's a certain amount of just letting go and especially letting go of like outcomes or expectations involved to assist in that low time preference. Do you think that, or is that kind of,
well, in regards to like in a relationship,
yeah, I guess, yeah. Yeah, in Bitcoin too, though, I think, if we're paralleling in some ways these low time preference aspects, like, do you think there's a certain amount of trust and surrender involved?
I don't know. Like, I guess I don't use the word surrender too much. So, but like in terms of trust, yes. And funny thing, like, so I've been involved in Bitcoin since 2016, and I actually like while I was kind of waiting here, I was just like looking like when I started kind of like recording my purchases of Bitcoin because for a long time I actually didn't record, like I wasn't like recording it. I don't know why not, but I just wasn't.
Yeah.
In the early days, I was just buying some here and there and whatever. And so looked when I first started recording in like I want to say it's a couple years back now. It's 21. I started recording like
Right?
every time I made a purchase, I would record it, like how much I paid. So I was looking back and I was looking at all the purchases that I made under 20,000 in 22, a good amount. I stacked like stupid hard. Um, so like trust, like, yeah, like at that point, like, I mean, I've definitely, I guess you could say I've surrendered like that. I'm going to put all my money into Bitcoin. And I totally like at that point, my trust, my conviction, like was there, like, even though like we were in the depths of that bear market when I'm sure there was a lot of people who are like, oh, this might not, like your son was probably pretty upset around that time, November 22, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, but I was like dumping every time any little bit of money came in that I could dump into Bitcoin.
I wish I was.
Yeah. Yeah. So, like, if that's what you mean, then yeah, I mean, yeah, like, I
Yeah.
think it does build some trust and, like in conviction into what you're doing for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. And, thinking about this whole, I guess for me, part of the reason why I wanted to do this series is to bring a bit of hope to like all the single Bitcoiners out there that just feel like kind of so different than regular people and find it hard to connect with regular people. And like, I don't actually think that, they necessarily need to find a Bitcoiner, but do you find like one of the reasons maybe even it was just like your marriage worked with and without Bitcoin is like the same values were there from the beginning?
Um, yeah, I guess. I mean, I think you really grow over time, like either together or apart, right? I mean, like, but at the same time, I think like Bitcoin's been great for our relationship. Like it's just been really a good thing. In terms of, I mean, it's really been allowed us to kind of plan our future a lot better.
Mhm.
It's allowed us to like, just be able to have more time with each other, more time to be able to do stuff together, and it's really been, and it's something that we both have found very compelling and very interesting. So like now I know like, hey, I'm gonna put this on, and she said, oh, that's so and so, and like she
Right.
knows she's interested in listening to the same things as me. Like it's been really great, and so that's so I kind of say that to also say like you don't necessarily have to find someone who's already a Bitcoiner.
Mhm.
Like there's plenty of people out there like that are ready to be orange pilled. I mean, I think so many people are so close to being orange pilled, they just don't know, and it just will take a person they do trust and they do care about and they do want to, maybe get involved with to get them to that point. And I think that's, that's not hard for most people. Most people can feel some type of pain if they're not
Yeah.
Bitcoiners, right? Like I think, I mean, maybe I'm just, like an outlier here, but I don't think I am. Like Bitcoiners don't feel the pain that your average person is feeling these days. And so like if you're a Bitcoiner, there's plenty of hope to you can just go date non-Bitcoiners. Now it doesn't mean everyone is like, but of course there's like you're gonna have criteria, and that you can still find a good person who's not a Bitcoiner, and dating them, they can become Bitcoiners pretty easily.
That's a great point. Thank you for saying that. That's a great point. It's like it's actually true where many people are on the brink of being a Bitcoiner, but they just don't know it because they don't understand that there's like a solution. They don't understand that there is a possibility for something better, a possibility for something that is more for the health and abundance of everyone. And I do think that Bitcoiners are still, I mean, we're obviously generalizing like a bunch of people when we say Bitcoiners, but I do think that Bitcoiners are feeling pain, like they are feeling the pain. But I think that even if they feel the pain of, say the state of the world or like truth, sometimes the truth hurts. The truth can still hurt. And I do think it's valuable just as a healer, it is valuable for us to, kind of feel the pain and not look for an external solution. Like it's valuable to just feel things. But I think with the difference with Bitcoiners, really what you're saying is like they have a solution.
Yeah, no, of course. Yeah. So like, just some of the, I think financial issues that people have to go through, like, like just talking to my sister, right? She's a few years younger than me, mid 40s, and she's been a teacher for a long time. And she told me the other day, like, I don't know if I'm ever going to be able, I don't think I'm going to ever be able to retire. I'm like,
Right.
being a teacher and having a pension, you're not going to be able to retire. And she's like, I'm not sure I'm going to be able to.
Right.
So, I just think like, if you're a Bitcoiner and you're like, that, like you said, there's a solution. So at least you're building towards that, or you've built towards that. And, other people haven't. So many other people haven't, but they know there's a problem, and they're
Yeah.
feeling that pain, and, so I just think, I don't know. I feel like I can see other people feeling that pain, but I don't necessarily have to feel it myself as a Bitcoiner.
Yeah, that's a good point. Like even that, like you devote your whole life to a profession like teaching and you can't retire.
I don't know.
That's
Yeah, yeah. I mean, she just felt like by the time she got paid her pension money, it wasn't going to be
That's
enough.
what I mean, and to me, I'm not judging her at all, I'm judging the system, like, that's my
No,
point.
for
It's
sure.
like, we're taking these public, like, servants, and I know Ben, Perrin and, BTC Sessions, like, he's talked about this too, because his wife is a nurse, and, like, they figured out that she makes less now than she did when she started, even though she's got more seniority and more experience and support and looks like her salary's higher, but in the whole scheme of everything, she actually makes less than when she was a brand new nurse.
Right. Wouldn't it make more sense as we get older and we had like less resources that things were getting cheaper? You know, but they're always getting more expensive. So
Yeah.
all terms,
So I do
paper,
think that
paper and Bitcoin terms, right?
yeah. Yeah, and I think you're right in that sense of like that's a perfect example where, people can be orange filled pretty easily if they're already seeing like something isn't right.
For sure. I mean, if my sister's husband was a Bitcoiner, she would be 1,000,000,000% all in. And I mean, she's close. I mean, I have her on that
Right.
year. For Christmas, I actually got her 1,000,000 sats and helped her.
Aw.
I bought her a hardware wallet and taught her how to like self custody her own Bitcoin.
Awesome.
So
You're a good
yeah,
brother.
she hasn't got any more since the Christmas gift. But like if her husband was, I'm sure my sister would already be over the hump. Or if I got her over the hump, I'm sure he'll come around.
Yeah. Actually, that's actually a really good point too, that we can break out of sort of gender roles, because I think it actually could be both ways.
Oh, no
Like,
question.
it could be both ways, right? Because if someone keeps, always coming back to like, well, there's Bitcoin, like anytime someone has a problem, well, there's Bitcoin. Or we could just save in Bitcoin, maybe eventually. I think that it's really more about awareness than anything. Because if somebody is willing to see that there's like problems, there's just something not right with the world, they're going to be more open minded to Bitcoin.
For sure. And I mean, I think most people realize that
Mhm.
they just need to figure out they have to come to the solution on their own. That's the biggest issue, is that you have to you have to be willing to make the progress down the rabbit hole a little bit, and then you start finding yourself wanting more, and then you go further down to where you're all in. But it just takes time.
Yeah. That's such a good point, because you can't push or force someone to get there. And I think, like, if you go into a relationship with someone, it's probably not advisable to, like, have that expectation that they have to become a Bitcoiner also.
For sure. No, I mean, you can't. I mean, because they have, again, you have to do the work. If you don't do any of the work, then you don't make it there. You just see it as some other, stock or equity or
Yeah.
something.
And
And
it's
that's
too scary then. It's too scary. I find, like, if you're not continuously learning, it's just too scary to, like, really believe in it.
yeah. Oh, no question. I think absolutely. If you don't know, it's very scary.
Yeah.
Yeah. My mom refuses to learn,
Yeah.
and yeah, and my dad has actually started to spend some time. So my dad had some worked for IBM for 30 years, and he actually just sold a small amount of IBM stock that he had since the 80s, and he's gonna put it all into Bitcoin, which I'm like, wow, Dad, I'm super proud of. But my mom just doesn't want to even know anything. So when
Yeah.
up, she does not want to even she doesn't want to talk about it. But I understand, as I'm got to be 50
Yeah.
now, I'm like, there are certain things I don't want to do on my phone. Like again, just using my
Yeah.
credit card, or, so I get it. It's hard, when you get
It's
older.
preference too. It's like
Technology moves
sometimes,
so fast.
yeah, and sometimes when you're older, you're like, I just don't want to do this. And that's my prerogative.
Right. Yeah, for sure.
Well, this has been great. Thank you so much for taking out the time and letting me just kind of think through some of these theories and talk about different things around Bitcoin, dating, and relationships, John.
Yeah, no, I listen, I'm so appreciative of you and grateful for you. Literally every single person who came to my conference, I'm like, "Oh my gosh, I love those people." They believed in something that was just like my idea, and no one in Bitcoin knew who I was. So it's not like anyone came because, John McGraw was having a conference, so I'm so appreciative that I was able to provide enough value to get people to come. For me to get you to come from Canada, I mean, just think about how big of a deal that is. That was a huge deal for you to make that, all those travel arrangements and come down there. That wasn't an easy flight. I think it was a pretty long flight for you. And, and then you had to give up, your time to be in Colombia, and you stayed for I think an extra week. I think I remember right. And so I'm like, how could I not be super appreciative of that? So, and then any opportunity I can get to maybe have people know what I'm doing and try to, maybe they can, come to Columbia next year. Any chance I get, like we kind of talked about, to, be able to talk about that a little bit too is really important.
Yeah.
So I just really appreciate you. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. And yeah, definitely we're bonded for life. And, it's interesting because I did feel really called to it. I mean, it helps that you have it in a beautiful location.
Well, that's part of like the event planning,
You know?
right? Like
Yeah.
location, location, location. It's important. You can't just do it anywhere and expect that people
Yeah.
want to come, you know?
Yeah, and it is interesting. I did feel like you did really good in that sense of like drawing people in. And I know for me, yeah, like it was like 2 days of travel to get there. And I was just like, am I a crazy person? Like, this is so much to get here. But I had been wanting to go to Colombia, and I'm so glad I did. Like, I really hope to return next year. And I will put everything in the show notes of where people can find you and your links and everything. So everyone will be able to find your site, you on X and everything like that.
Right.
I'll definitely, and you're such a supportive like social media friend, and I think that's part of it too, is like it's easy to support you because you're also supporting us.
For sure. Well, listen, one thing I learned really early in being like an entrepreneur is like, look, if it's like not good for you, you're not going to keep doing it. If it's not good for me, I'm not going to keep doing it either. So like it has to be good for both people or else it's like
Mhm.
not going to continue very long. So like to me, I always try to make it good for the other person too so that we can keep doing it and hopefully it grows.
Yeah, win-win. Win-win. That's how I feel about Bitcoin, Bitcoin community, Bitcoin global community, Bitcoin friendships, Bitcoin dating, win-win.
For sure, no question.
Awesome. Well, thanks again, John, for coming on the show.
Thank you.
Take care.